episode 9, and today I'm honored to have Dr. Shauna Pandya. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Amita.
And thank you for taking out a time from your clinical duties. I know like you're in Canada right now and you're kind of in the middle of a COVID surge. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's a nice break from the clinical stuff.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm going to just share a little bit about Dr. Pandya. Dr. Shauna Pandya is a scientist, astronaut candidate with Project POSUM, physician, aquanaut, speaker, martial artist, advanced diver, skydiver, pilot in training, VP of immersive medicine with Luxonic Technologies, and fellow of the Explorers Club. She's also director of the International Institute of Astronautical Services or Sciences Space Medicine Group. She's chief instructor of the IIAS POSUM Operational Space Medicine course, director of medical research at Orbital Assembly Construction, clinical lecturer at the University of Alberta, and podcast host with the World Extreme Medicine WMCast series, and primary investigator for the SHAD Canada Blue Origin Student Microgravity Competition, appointed member of Ascend to 2021 Guiding Coalition, Life Sciences Team Lead for the Association of Space Flight Professionals, and sessional lecturer for the Technology and Future Medicine course at the University of Alberta. She also serves as a medical advisor to several space medical technology companies, including Mission Space Food. Very cool. Genesis, Aquanaut, as well as Jasper Dark Sky Festival Advisory Committee. She holds degrees in neuroscience, space, and medicine, and a certification in entrepreneurship. She is currently completing a fellowship in wilderness medicine and was granted an honorary fellowship in extreme and wilderness medicine by the World Extreme Medicine Organization in 2021, and was one of 50 physicians selected to attend the European Space Agency Medicine Physician Training course. She was named one of Women's Executive Network's top 100 most powerful women in Canada, and a Canadian Space Agency Space Ambassador in 2021. Dr. Pandya was part of the first crew to test commercial spacesuit in zero gravity in 2015, and she earned her astronaut designation during the 2019 Neptune Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration mission. She served as a commander during 2020 tour at the Mars Desert Research Station. Her expeditions were captured in the Land Rover short released with Apollo 11 First Steps films. She previously interned at ESA's European Astronaut Center and NASA's Johnson Space Center. Okay, so, and I'd like to, I want to just thank you for being here, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm sure we'll have a wonderful conversation today.
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel like there's so much here. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you really started pursuing the area of space medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like a lot of kids growing up, I wanted to be an astronaut, and I just never grew out of that dream. And I was lucky enough to have a role model growing up. I grew up during the 90s in Canada when Canada's first female physician, Canada's first female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, flew into space. She was our first female astronaut, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's incredible. I looked at her and I said, she's Canadian, I'm Canadian, she's female, I'm female. So now all I need to do is go be a neuroscientist, physician, and astronaut, and boom, it's done. And in your child's mind, it's that simple. And so that really is what set me on the path. That's what caused me to pursue, that's what inspired me to pursue my BSc in honors neuroscience. That's what put me on the path towards medicine. And then as I was kind of going through my early career, I never wanted to forget about that space dream. And so as I was applying to medical school, I realized that firstly, medical school is really competitive. Not everyone is guaranteed to get in. And secondly, I don't really want to quite forget about space. And so on a whim, I applied to the master's program at the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. To my surprise, I got into both medicine as well as the ISU program, and I thought, well, let's chance it. Let's ask for a deferral, and that I was granted that deferral, and that was the start of realizing that, you know, you can make space and space medicine a part of your career. From there, I was lucky enough to intern at the European Space Agency's European Astronaut Center. And that was really kind of the beginning of starting to contribute to research and meaningful work within the domain of space medicine.
That's amazing. And I would like to clarify one thing, that you were designated aquanaut and not astronaut designation. So, you know, why don't you just actually, I'm sorry about that, but I wanted to actually just talk a little bit more about the differences between those designations and, yeah, just to understand a little bit more for the viewers.
Yeah, sure. There's a whole lot mouthful in there, and I'm sorry, I should have given you a shorter bio. Hopefully
No, no.
people are still listening. So yeah, the other titles that were mentioned in there. So I'm a scientist, astronaut, candidate, program graduate with Project Possum, and IIAS. And so what your viewers are quickly learning, I'm guessing, is that space and exploration is full of acronyms. And so POSSUM stands for Polar Suborbital Science of the Upper Mesosphere. IIAS stands for the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. Those two terms are interchangeable. So this is a program where I've been able to contribute to bioastronautics and space medicine and operational research and protocol development for human spaceflight. I've been lucky enough to test spacesuits in microgravity on parabolic flight, which some might know as the Vomit Comet. That's the airplane that flies in a parabola, and then when it's flying in that downward arc and you're falling at the same rate as the plane, you generate 20 to 30 seconds of microgravity, and you can perform meaningful science, or you can test the motion and the movements of the spacesuit. And so that's where that scientist, astronaut, candidate, program graduate designation comes from. And the other designation you mentioned is aquanaut. So aquanaut is anyone who has lived and worked under the water and breathed the ambient air pressure for 24 hours, so at saturation. And so that designation for me came on a 2019 research and science mission called Neptune. So that's yet another acronym that stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. And basically on this 5-day underwater mission in the Florida Keys, we worked in a underwater dive saturation complex at 20 feet. We performed experiments related to psychological testing, evoked potential testing, vital signs, heart rate variability monitoring, technology demonstrations. And by virtue of living and working at that depth underwater for 5 days, we got the aquanaut designation. And then just to quickly explain a little bit of that physiology, although I know you know this. So when you're at depth, when you're in saturation and all those bubbles in your bloodstream have dissolved and the nitrogen bubbles have gone into saturation, you have to decompress at a set time period to allow those bubbles to safely come out of solution. So at 20 feet, there's no real set decompression period. But for example, if you go to the Aquarius Reef Base, which is another underwater research facility just 13 miles down the road from the Jules Undersea Lodge where we had our mission, that's at 50 feet. And to decompress, if you're doing a mission there, you have to decompress for 15 hours and 47 minutes. So that's why that saturation and that and the physiology becomes important. But that's just an aside. So the aquanaut designation is simply by virtue of having lived and done an expedition underwater for that duration of time.
So basically, you were underwater in a scuba suit for 5 days straight.
No, that's a great question. So I should clarify. We were in an underwater habitat.
Okay.
So we were at the Jules Undersea Lodge at 20 feet of depth. And so it's this H-shaped complex. And one side is the sleeping quarters, while the H in the middle is the moon pool where you dive up through. So you have to dive down in full scuba gear to get there, and you have to bring all your gear with you. And then on that other arm, that H is the common area. So it's the galley, the kitchen, the common gathering area. And so we would suit up and go scuba diving on our exploratory sojourns. We call them EVAs, so extravehicular activities. That's the term they use in space. So we use that same designation. So once or twice a day, we would go out of the habitat with certain objectives in mind, and that's when we would suit up. But when we were in the hab, we were simply in shorts and t-shirts and just regular clothes.
Okay, that's very cool. I feel like this is from a sci-fi because you're introducing me to like a whole new world. My other question for you is about like, you talked about Roberta Bonder, who's the first Canadian woman in space. And, I wanted to clarify, like are there many MDs who are actually astronauts? And I
Yeah,
know this is a stupid question. I'm very limited in my knowledge about space medicine, so I wanted to ask you.
there's definitely, when you look for astronauts within the traditional space agency path towards becoming an astronaut. So whether it's the Canadian Space Agency, whether it's NASA, they really look for highly qualified folks, including engineers, military pilots, and doctors. And so they're definitely well represented at that level. If I had to guess a percentage, maybe 15%. That's totally pulled out of kind of my thinking through the astronauts that I know of. So, for example, Canadian physician astronauts include Roberta Bonder, Bob Thirsk, Dave Williams, David Saint-Jacques. American astronauts include astronaut physicians include Scott Parazynski, Mike Barrett, Serena Onion-Chancellor. Some may know of Johnny Kim, the Navy SEAL doctor astronaut. Like they're just an incredibly impressive group. So doctors are well represented, but I don't think they're anywhere close to the majority of astronauts at the space agency level. Usually you'll find PhD scientists, engineers, military veterans, pilots. So very highly qualified, very, very smart and operationally capable folks.
Okay. Yeah. I guess because I guess there's been a increasing interest in space medicine in the past few years. I guess now that there is the potential for commercial flights to go to space. Obviously, we saw the recent space expedition by Jeff Bezos and his team. So what do you see for the future of space medicine as a profession? Do you see it becoming like a specialty in medicine? Do you see doctors going to space? Like I was, it's like there's so much to talk about. I feel like we're just able to scratch the surface today, but I wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I absolutely feel we're just at the beginning of what we know and what we need to know in space medicine. And so for anyone who's relatively new to this field, the bottom line is that space is trying to kill you. And so when you talk about the hazards of the spaceflight environment, you talk about microgravity, so zero gravity, distance from Earth. The further away you go, the more of a communication delay there is. By the time you get to the furthest alignment of Mars, round trip communication between Earth and Mars will be 46 minutes. There's the isolation and confinement of being in a tin can hurtling through space with only your crew and being away from your family and friends. There's the everything else which falls under hostile environments, so whether that's altered day-night cycles. So you're experiencing 16 sunset sunrise cycles for 24 hours on the International Space Station, or whether that's lunar dust, for example. And then finally, there's radiation. So the further away you go from Earth, the more radiation becomes a risk. So there's all these things to mitigate. And so that's what current flight surgeons, current researchers are trying to get a better sense of when we look at current and previous data from human space flight. Space medicine is a little bit, it's a subset of aerospace and aviation medicine. So definitely there are specializations that you can get either through the military or through civilian routes. Depending on where you're training. So I know the US has excellent aerospace training programs. Definitely in Canada through the military stream, you can go through, get an aerospace designation. And then space medicine is but a subset of that. And then coming back to your initial question, kind of where are we at right now? That's a very astute question because there's two key things now that really are on opposite ends of the space medicine spectrum that we really need to pay closer attention to. And so one of them is exactly what you alluded to. Now that we're opening up space flight frontier to just, the space flight just about anyone. Virgin Galactic says so safe your grandmother could fly. And so if we're proposing to take everyone to space on a commercial suborbital flight, like the Blue Origin crew and Jeff Bezos did in July, like Virgin Galactic and Richard Branson did in July, what exactly is the risk? And so that's the one question. And then on the other end of the spectrum, way further out, if we're proposing to not just stick around in low Earth orbit at the level of the International Space Station, but go forward to the moon with the Artemis missions, and then use the moon as a test bed to going through Mars, well, then suddenly the game becomes a whole lot more complex because we're further from Earth. There's a huge communication delay. We need to become more self-sufficient, and there's far more radiation to contend with. So then it's the other end of the spectrum is how do we keep astronauts healthy, thriving, and self-sufficient on a destination like the Red Planet. So to quickly address the suborbital flight question, the data that we're seeing is quite encouraging. So the way I like to phrase it is on a spectrum of transatlantic air travel to International Space Station, NASA astronaut selection, suborbital spaceflight is a lot closer to a transatlantic flight. And the reason is the flight duration isn't all that long. You're spending about 3 minutes in microgravity on a suborbital flight like Blue Origin's New Shepard flight. And so really, things can always go wrong, even on an airplane. And we all dread that call. Is there a doctor on board? But you're more likely to run into that on an 8-hour transatlantic flight than maybe an hour end to end by the time the doors close, doors open. Suborbital flight with the flight profile itself being on the order of minutes. And I've actually recently published a literature review, in fact, on this very topic called Medical Guidelines for Commercial Suborbital Spaceflight. And we have data from centrifuge studies looking at everyone from 19 to 89-year-olds who've had insulin pumps, COPD, heart transplants in these hypergravity situations. So when you're accelerating and you feel that 6G pull on your chest, all of these subjects did actually really well. And really the number one disqualifier wasn't something medical or a chronic medical condition, but it was anxiety, panic attacks, claustrophobia, or doing something unsafe. So what we're seeing on the commercial suborbital flight side is that it's actually probably pretty safe. The other end of the spectrum, we have so much to figure out because it's the supplies, it's the constraints, it's the new type of hazards that we're contending with. So not only are we going further, the type of activity we do, like moonwalks, like Mars walks, you're suddenly on rugged terrain. The threat for slipping and breaking something is much greater than on a spacewalk in zero gravity outside the ISS. And then the other question is, what kind of support do you need and how far are you willing to go? So you have a cardiac arrest and you have to run a code on Mars and you get return of spontaneous circulation. Well, then what? Do you have an ICU? Can you intubate? Can you ventilate? And if not, well, then you have to ask yourself, is it futility of care to even undergo a code? So these are all of the questions that keep us up at night. There's so much to think about. And that's why I say we're really getting started when it comes to space medicine.
That's very cool. And for someone, like I said, I feel like we should have another talk at some point because it's super fascinating. For someone who's interested in space medicine, who's in medicine or who's in medical school, what's the best way to start learning about the field and maybe getting involved?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So there's so many awesome resources out there. The way I got my start, aside from going to do the master's program at ISU, was going to conferences. I was lucky enough as a medical student to publish a paper on telemedicine for the developing world. And then someone saw that and said, hey, will you turn that into a book chapter on space technologies that have benefited everyday medical care on Earth? And so I was lucky enough, by virtue of going to a conference and presenting a paper as a med student, to have a book chapter. So go to conferences, go to the Aerospace Medical Association conference. That's a big one in the US. Go to the International Astronautical Congress, go to the World Extreme Medicine Congress. You'll find your people there, the people who are just as passionate about this. And then if you really want to commit, go do a PhD or a master's in something spaceflight physiology, life sciences, or medically related. medical students in the US can apply to be an aerospace, do an aerospace medicine elective at NASA. I was lucky enough to do that through the Canadian Space Agency at Johnson Space Center when I was a medical student. So keep your eye out. I think there's so many names here that are maybe hard to keep abreast of, but keep your eye out for opportunity. Start asking around, start going to conferences, even if you're not presenting, because that's where you're going to start making those connections, start seeing what your next internship or paper or opportunity or collaboration would look like.
That's very cool. And, I guess my other question for you is like, what's the most interesting experience you've ever had in, space medicine? Like, I know it's hard to just pinpoint one, but when you shared like you were underwater in an underwater space station for 5 days, like that seemed pretty cool, and it's pretty hard to top that off. But what's been, your favorite experience so far?
Oh gosh, there's so many, right? It is hard to pick, and my crewmates and my teammates always laugh at me because every new operational course, every new mission or expedition that we do, I say, well, this one's my favorite. Nothing's ever going to top this, and sure enough, the next one does. That Neptune mission that we talked about, the underwater mission, was really special. We put so much time and preparation and the better part of a year of preparation into that. That crew is like family. We speak on the daily. And then professionally, a really cool moment for us through IIAS is David Saint-Jacques. He's the current Canadian physician and astronaut that I mentioned earlier. And so what we did, he flew up to the space station in December 2018 or 2019, and he took a biomonitoring device up with him. And basically, we partnered with the Canadian Space Agency the month before he went up to test what the electronic noise generated in that biomonitoring device is like when you're wearing a spacesuit. And we tested that in 0G on parabolic flight. And so to be able to really contribute to the data and to the success of space missions from a Canadian perspective, from an international perspective, that was a really special moment as well. So there's so many, but those are two for you.
That's really cool. Where can my the people who watch this, the viewers, can find you? Do you want to just share your social media account or any websites that you have in case they have questions for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to continue the conversation. So if people want to find me, Shauna Pandya, so SHAWNAPANDYA. That's my Twitter handle, my Instagram handle. That's what I am on LinkedIn. And that's my website, shaunapandya.com, and then also Dr. Shauna Pandya on Facebook. So pretty easy. As long as you remember my name, you'll find me.
Awesome. Thank you. What's like the biggest piece of advice you have for someone who's interested in pursuing a career like yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing is work really, really, really hard. Try to seek to become the hardest working person you know, because that's free. That doesn't cost anything. It's not something you're born with or without. It's something you develop. And then act like you belong here. Whatever it is you want to do, you absolutely do. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And then finally, seek to lift up other people along the way, because there's so many people who don't have the same opportunities that we do, and that who are just waiting to get started. So uplift others as you go.
Awesome. So again, thank you for being here, Dr. Pandya. And I'm going to share your social media accounts on the show notes. And as I mentioned before, this is episode 9. Thank you for being here. You can find more videos on YouTube at Amita Kundra. And you can find more information at asktechdoc.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Amita Kundra MD. So thanks for being here, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Pandya. It was so much fun.
Yeah, thanks, Amita. That was really great. And it's always fun to get a little bit nerdy about the physiology with a fellow MD, especially your background's in cardiothoracic anesthesiology. So yep. you know the stuff inside out. So it's kind of fun to nerd out.
Thank you.
that, that, that,